The boardroom was completely silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. I stood at the far end of the conference table, my hands gripping the back of my chair so hard my knuckles had turned white. My son Colton sat at the head of the table where I usually sat. He was still wearing his wedding ring from yesterday. It caught the light from the window behind him. His new wife Tessa sat beside him, her manicured hand resting possessively on his arm. Her smile was small and satisfied, like she'd won something. The board members sat around the table watching me. Some looked uncomfortable, others looked curious. A few of the younger ones, the ones Tessa's father had recommended we hire, were smirking. "Mom," Colton said. His voice was flat and businesslike. He wouldn't look me in the eyes. "It's time you step down. We need new leadership for the company." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my stomach drop. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of joke. "You're firing me," I managed to say. My voice cracked. Tessa leaned back in her chair and spoke before Colton could answer. "It's better for everyone, Marilyn. The company needs fresh leadership. New vision. You understand." Colton finally looked at me. His face was cold. "It's not personal, Mom. It's business." I walked out of that boardroom in a complete daze. My legs felt like they weren't my own. I could hear whispers behind me as I left, but the words didn't register. The hallway seemed impossibly long. The late afternoon sun was streaming through the windows, bright and cheerful, completely wrong for what had just happened. I made it to the parking lot before the reality truly hit me. My name is Marilyn Reed, and that company, Reed Builders, was my entire life for 27 years. I'd started it with my late husband when we had nothing but a rusted pickup truck and a dream. When he died 15 years ago, Colton was only 17. Just a kid. I'd run the company alone since then. Raised my son alone. Every late night I'd spent at the office. Every missed birthday party. Every Christmas I'd worked through. All of it had been for him, so he could have something to inherit. Something to be proud of. I taught him everything. How to read blueprints. How to negotiate with suppliers. How to lead a team. I'd given him more responsibility as he got older, bringing him into management, preparing him to eventually take over when I was ready to retire. And now the boy I'd taught to drive had just taken my keys and kicked me out of my own car. It had all started at his wedding the night before. I should have seen it coming then. Colton had married Tessa Quinn. Her father Richard owned Quinn Construction, the rival company we'd been beating out for contracts for years. When Tessa smiled at me during the reception, something about it had felt wrong. Not grateful or warm like a new daughter-in-law should be. It was victorious, triumphant, like she'd just won a competition I didn't know we were having. Later that night, I'd gone looking for Colton to say goodbye. I found him and Tessa in a quiet corner of the venue. They didn't see me approaching. "Once it's ours," Tessa was saying in a low voice, "we'll make it so much bigger than she ever could. My father has plans." Colton had nodded. "She's been talking about retiring anyway. This will just speed things up." I'd frozen in place. Told myself I'd misheard. That I was being paranoid. That my son wouldn't betray me like that. I'd laughed it off and turned around without saying anything. But now, standing in the parking lot with my belongings in a box, I realized that Smile at the wedding should have told me everything. That conversation should have been my warning. And I'd ignored it because I'd trusted him. 'Cause he was my son. I drove home in silence. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. When I got there I didn't cry. I just sat at my late husband's old desk in the study and stared at the brass nameplate I'd kept all these years. It said Marilyn Reed CEO, in elegant letters. I poured myself a drink. Whiskey. Something strong. My husband used to drink this same brand when he needed to think. The desk had a bottom drawer that I rarely opened. Inside was a sealed box I hadn't looked at in years. I pulled it out now and broke the seal. Inside were the original incorporation documents from when we'd first started the company. The ones my husband had made me co-sign before Colton was even born. And tucked between them was a letter in my husband's handwriting. I unfolded it with trembling fingers. "Marilyn," it read, "if anything happens to me, remember this. You hold the majority stake. I structured it this way to protect you. Never tell anyone unless you absolutely must. Trust your judgment." I read it 3 times. The majority stake. All these years, I'd let Colton believe we were equal partners, that he was slowly taking over. But legally, according to these papers, I still owned 51% of Reed Builders. For 27 years, I'd never needed to use that power. Never needed to pull rank. Until today. The next morning my phone started buzzing at 6 a.m. I picked it up and saw notifications flooding in. Breaking news alerts. Social media posts. Email after email. I opened one of the news articles. Breaking. Reed Builders announces leadership transition. Colton Reed named CEO. There was a photo attached that made my throat burn. Colton standing in front of our office building. Tessa beside him with her hand on his chest like she owned him. They were both smiling. The caption underneath read, "A new generation of leadership for Reed Builders." Scrolled through the comments below the article. Most of them made me sick. About time. She was getting too old anyway. Finally some young blood in charge. The son probably knows what he's doing better than his mom. They didn't know anything. Didn't know I'd built that company from nothing. Didn't know I'd kept it running for 15 years after my husband died. Didn't know that without me, there wouldn't be a Reed Builders for Colton to take over. I closed my laptop slowly and carefully. Revenge wasn't my goal here. I didn't want to hurt my son. But correction. That was necessary. Justice. That was required. They'd made their move publicly, confidently, assuming I'd just disappear quietly. They were about to learn they'd made a terrible mistake. I spent that entire week in silence. I let the world believe I'd walked away. Let them think I'd accepted my fate. But every night I drove past the office building. Through the lit windows I could see them. Tessa hosting what looked like strategy meetings in my former office. Colton nodding along like a puppet. Young employees I didn't recognize moving through the halls. They thought I'd disappeared. That I was at home crying into my wine. But I was actually meeting quietly with Thomas, our original company lawyer. The same one who'd helped my husband and me incorporate all those years ago. I showed him the documents from my husband's desk. He examined them carefully. His reading glasses perched on his nose. When he looked up, his eyes were wide. "Marilyn," he said quietly, "do you realize what this means? You're still the majority shareholder. Colton can't actually remove you as CEO without your consent." My heartbeat had steadied for the first time in days. "Good," I said calmly. "Then let's play the long game." Thomas smiled. It was the smile of a lawyer who knew exactly what was about to happen. "I'll start preparing the paperwork." Within a month, cracks started appearing in their perfect takeover. The first sign was the employees. The ones who'd been loyal to me for years started quitting. People I'd hired personally. People I'd promoted and trained. They didn't want to work under Tessa's management style, which apparently involved a lot of yelling and unrealistic demands. I heard about it through the industry grapevine. Former employees calling me to apologize for leaving. To tell me they'd come back if I ever started another company. Tessa replaced them all with her friends. People with shiny resumes but no real construction experience. Colton didn't seem to notice that the invoices were piling up. That suppliers were starting to leave angry messages. That long-term clients were quietly taking their business elsewhere. But I noticed. From my position outside the company I watched everything. I still had friends in the industry. People who kept me informed. And I watched the empire they'd stolen from me begin to rot from the inside. For the first time in weeks I smiled. Not because I was happy about the company suffering. But because I knew it wouldn't be suffering for long. 'Cause I was going to fix it. On my terms. 2 weeks after the takeover, Tessa invited me to dinner. The invitation came through email, formal and cold. "Let's clear the air," it said. "We should discuss the transition properly." The restaurant she'd chosen was the nicest one in town. Expensive. The kind of place you go to show off. I showed up exactly on time wearing my best suit. Tessa was already there, sitting at a table by the window. She looked pleased with herself. "Marilyn," she said with fake warmth. "I'm so glad you came. I know this whole situation has been difficult." I sat down and ordered wine. Her talk. She went on about how the company needed young energy and modern strategies. How I'd done such a wonderful job, but it was time to pass the torch. Halfway through the meal, she leaned in closer. Her voice dropped. "You should sell your remaining shares to us," she said. "To Colton and me. It's time to move on, Marilyn. Start fresh. Enjoy your retirement." I took a slow sip of my wine and looked her directly in the eyes. "I think I'll hold on to them," I said softly. "Sentimental value, you understand." Something flickered in her eyes. The first sign of panic. She recovered quickly, but I'd seen it. She didn't know exactly what shares I held. Didn't know the full extent of my ownership. And that ignorance was going to cost her everything. The next week I got an email that changed everything. It was from a company-wide mailing list I was apparently still on. Someone had forgotten to remove me. The email was about an upcoming board meeting. And attached to it was a proposal document. A proposal to merge Reed Builders with Quinn Construction, Tessa's father's company. I read through it carefully. The merger would essentially dissolve Reed Builders as an independent entity. All assets would be absorbed into Quinn Construction. The Reed name would disappear completely. At the bottom of the document was a signature line. It required approval from the majority shareholder. They still thought that was Colton. They had no idea the majority shareholder was actually me. And that this merger required my signature to go through. I forwarded the email to Thomas immediately. His response came back within minutes. "This is it. This is what we needed. They've just handed us everything." I sat back in my chair and smiled. They were so confident, so sure of themselves, so certain they'd covered all their bases. But they'd forgotten the most important rule in business. Always know who really holds the power. And they were about to learn that lesson the hard way. Colton's birthday was 3 weeks after the takeover. I'd been invited, though the invitation had felt obligatory. Like they couldn't not invite me without it looking suspicious. The party was at an expensive restaurant. All of Colton's friends and Tessa's family were there. I arrived late and sat at the far end of the table. Nobody really talked to me. I was the ghost at the feast. The reminder of the past they wanted to forget. During dinner, Tessa made sure to speak loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Colton's turning the company into something his father would be so proud of," she announced, raising her glass. "Taking it to heights it's never seen before." The table applauded. Colton smiled uncomfortably. I raised my own glass slowly and spoke clearly. "Funny," I said. "That's exactly what I thought I was doing for the past 15 years. The silence that followed was beautiful. Tessa's face went red. Colton stared at his plate. Several people looked down at their food awkwardly. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Then someone changed the subject and the moment passed. But I'd made my point. I wasn't going to disappear quietly. And I wasn't going to let them rewrite history. My husband built that company. I maintained it. And they were destroying it. But not for much longer. Thomas and I began pulling records. Financial documents, contract histories, email chains, everything we could legally access. And what we found was damning. Fraud. Clear and obvious fraud. Money being moved into accounts that didn't exist. Invoices for services that were never provided. Supplies ordered but never received yet paid for. All under Tessa's authorization. She'd been siphoning money from the company since the day she and Colton took over. Not huge amounts that would be obvious, but steady, consistent amounts that added up. Hundreds of thousands of dollars over just a few weeks. Thomas put together a file that was 3 inches thick. Every receipt was a weapon. Every forged signature was a loaded gun. "This is enough to put her away," Thomas said quietly. "And possibly Colton too if he knew about it." "He didn't," I said firmly. "My son is weak. But he's not a criminal." "Are you sure?" "Yes," I said. Though honestly I wasn't entirely sure anymore. I didn't need to destroy them completely. I just needed to let them destroy themselves. And with this evidence, that was exactly what would happen. 2 in the morning my phone rang. I'd been asleep but I woke up instantly. The caller ID showed Colton's name. I considered not answering. But something made me pick up. "Mom." His voice was shaky. "Are you happy now? You're tearing us apart." I sat up in bed, fully awake now. "I'm not doing anything, Colton. You did this to yourself." "People are asking questions," he said. "Suppliers are threatening to sue. Employees are talking to lawyers. Everything's falling apart and you're just sitting back watching." "Yes," I said calmly. "I am watching. Because you kicked me out, remember? This is your company now. Your problem." "Mom, please. You made your choice," I interrupted. "You chose her over me. Over everything I built. Over your father's memory. Now you have to live with that choice." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "I'm sorry." "You will be," I said. Then I hung up. I sat in the dark for a while after that. The guilt in his voice had told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't evil. He wasn't cruel by nature. He was just weak. Too weak to stand up to Tessa. Too weak to see he was being manipulated. But weakness wasn't an excuse for betrayal. And I wasn't going to save him from the consequences. By the end of the 2nd month, half the board had resigned. The ones who'd been there since my husband's time. The ones who understood construction and loyalty and honest business. Profits were tanking. Projects were behind schedule. Major clients were pulling their contracts. Tessa tried to rally everyone with big speeches and flashy presentations. But words couldn't fix the fundamental problems. The company was bleeding money and losing reputation. When a major project collapsed because permits hadn't been filed correctly, the press turned on them. "Reed Builders in Crisis," the headlines read. "Management Chaos at Construction Firm. Reed Legacy Crumbles Under New Leadership." I watched from my living room as the news coverage played. And that's when I knew it was time. Time to stop watching. Time to act. I called Thomas. "File the paperwork," I said. "It's time." "Are you sure?" he asked. "Absolutely certain." He was quiet for a moment. Then I heard the smile in his voice. "I'll have everything ready by morning." I requested an emergency shareholders meeting. It was my legal right as a shareholder. Thomas filed all the proper paperwork, sent all the required notices, made everything official and by the book. When Tessa saw the meeting request, she apparently laughed. I heard about it from someone who was still feeding me information from inside. "She doesn't even work here anymore," Tessa had said. "Why would we care what she wants?" But when the formal notice arrived at the office, sealed and stamped by lawyers, her confidence had faltered. Because right there on the official letterhead was something she'd never known. Something nobody but Thomas and I had known. Majority shareholder. Marilyn Reed. 51% ownership. I heard she'd gone pale. That she'd called her father immediately. That there'd been screaming and panic. Colton had apparently just sat in his office staring at the paperwork, unable to process what it meant. They'd thought I was powerless. Thought I'd walked away with nothing. But I'd been holding all the cards the entire time. I just hadn't needed to play them. Till now. The next morning, I walked back into the Reed Builders office for the first time since they'd fired me. I wore my best suit. My head was high. My steps were confident. The receptionist didn't know what to say when she saw me. I just smiled and walked past her to the boardroom. Same room where Colton had humiliated me 2 months ago. He was already there when I arrived. So was Tessa. Her face was red and her jaw was clenched. She looked like she wanted to hit something. Richard Quinn, her father, sat beside her. He looked worried. The rest of the board filtered in. Some of them were new faces. Others were old colleagues who looked relieved to see me. I sat down at the head of the table. My old seat. Colton opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. "I'll speak first," I said. My voice was calm and clear. "I built this company with blood and bone. With my husband. With 27 years of my life. You misused my name. You disrespected my husband's legacy. You betrayed my trust." I slid a folder across the table toward them. "And now you answer to me." Tessa grabbed the folder and opened it. I watched as her face went from red to white. Inside was everything. The incorporation documents showing my majority stake. The financial audit showing her fraud. The emails proving she'd been planning this takeover since before she even married Colton. Richard tried to grab the folder from her, but she held it away. "This is," Tessa started. "Legal." I finished for her. "Yes, all of it." She looked at Colton desperately. "Did you know about this?" He just stared at the table. "Vote to reinstate me as CEO," I said to the board. "All in favor." The old board members raised their hands immediately. The new ones looked at Tessa, then at the documents, then slowly raised their hands too. Even Richard Quinn didn't vote against me, because he could read the writing on the wall. I was reinstated as interim CEO effective immediately. Tessa stood up so fast her chair fell backward. "This isn't over," she hissed. "Actually," I said calmly, "it is." She stormed toward the door. Slammed it so hard the glass shook. The sound was like music. Colton sat there in silence. His eyes glazed over. He looked lost, broken, and part of me hurt for him. But the larger part remembered how easily he'd thrown me away. Taking back control wasn't the victory. That was just the first step. The real work was rebuilding what they'd destroyed. I spent the first week meeting with every employee who was left. Apologizing personally for the chaos. Asking what they needed. Some were angry with me for leaving. Others were just relieved I was back. I invited the old employees who'd quit to return. Offered them better salaries. Better conditions. Most of them came back. The ones who'd seen what Tessa and Colton were doing and wanted no part of it. I wasn't there for revenge. Kept telling myself that. I was there for redemption. For the company. For my husband's memory. For the employees who depended on this business. Within 2 weeks we'd stabilized. Projects got back on track. Clients started returning. Suppliers agreed to work with us again. The Reed name started to mean something again. Something good. But Tessa and Richard Quinn weren't done fighting. And I knew the real battle was just beginning. Tessa and her father filed a lawsuit 3 weeks after I took back control. They claimed fraud. Said I'd manipulated the documents. That I'd stolen the company from Colton. That I was mentally unfit to run a business. It was desperate and stupid. But it was also public. The media picked it up immediately. "Family business battle turns ugly," the headlines read. I hired the best lawyers I could find. We prepared for war. But when we got to court, something beautiful happened. The judge asked to see the financial records. All of them. Including the ones showing Tessa's fraud. The money she'd stolen. The fake accounts. Every illegal transaction she'd authorized. I watched as their lawyer's face went pale. As Richard Quinn started whispering urgently to Tessa. As their entire case crumbled in real time. They tried to blame each other. Tessa said she'd been following her father's advice. Richard said Tessa had acted independently. The judge wasn't having any of it. The lawsuit was dismissed. And criminal charges were filed against both of them. I walked out of that courtroom feeling lighter than I had in months. Justice wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was just the quiet sound of truth winning. Colton showed up at my house one night about a week after the court case. It was raining hard. I heard the knock and opened the door to find him standing there soaking wet. His hair was plastered to his head. His eyes were red. "Mom," he said. His voice was shaking. "I don't know who I am anymore." Every instinct I had as a mother wanted to pull him inside. Dry him off. Make him tea. Fix it like I'd fixed everything when he was little. But I couldn't. Not this time. "Maybe now you'll learn who you are without them," I said quietly. He looked at me like I'd slapped him. "You're really not going to help me." "I already helped you," I said. "For your entire life. I built you a future. And you threw it away." "I made a mistake," he whispered. "Yes," I agreed. "You did." Then I gently closed the door. I stood on the other side listening to him crying in the rain. And I cried too. But I didn't open the door again. Sometimes love means letting people face their own consequences, even when it breaks your heart. A month later, the court seized Richard Quinn's assets as part of the criminal case. His company, Quinn Construction, was put up for sale to pay restitution to Reed Builders and other companies he'd defrauded over the years. I could have bought it myself. Could have absorbed my old rival's business and made Reed Builders even bigger. But I didn't want it. Instead, I sold the assets to the smallest competitor in our industry. A man named Marcus who'd been building his company slowly and honestly for 10 years. The same man Richard Quinn had mocked at industry events. Had called him too small to matter. Marcus called me after the sale went through. "Why did you do this?" he asked. "Poetic justice," I said simply. "Clean and quiet." He laughed. "Thank you, Marilyn. I won't forget this." "Just be better than he was," I said. "That's all I ask." Felt good. Not because I'd hurt Richard Quinn, but because I'd helped someone who deserved it. Someone who'd built something real. That was what business should be about. With the crisis handled and the company stable, I made a decision. Reed Builders would change. Not just in leadership but in purpose. I renamed it Reed & Company. Broader. More inclusive. Less about one family's legacy and more about the work itself. We started taking on community projects. Building homes for veterans. Renovating shelters. Creating affordable housing. Half of the original team had returned. We focused on quality work and fair wages. Treated people with respect. I didn't care about being the biggest construction company anymore. I cared about being the best. About doing work that mattered. The company wasn't about money now. It was about peace. About building things that would last. Things that would help people. My husband would have loved it. This was what he'd always dreamed of. Before the competition got fierce and the market got tough. When it was just about creating something good. I'd finally gotten back to that. And it felt right. A journalist reached out to me for an interview. A major business magazine wanted to do a feature on the Reed Builders comeback. I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop downtown. She asked all the expected questions about the takeover, the legal battle, the restructuring. Then she asked the one that mattered. "Do you forgive your son?" I thought about it for a long moment. Took a sip of my coffee. "Forgiveness doesn't mean access," I said finally. She blinked. "Can you explain that?" "I can forgive someone for hurting me," I said. "I can understand they made mistakes. But that doesn't mean I have to let them back into my life. Doesn't mean I have to give them another chance to hurt me." She wrote it down carefully. "That's powerful." "It's survival," I corrected. The article came out 2 weeks later. That quote, "Forgiveness doesn't mean access," was the headline. It went viral overnight. Women across the country shared it, posted it, tattooed it on their arms. It became bigger than just my story. It became a message about boundaries and self-respect. And I was proud of that. While all this was happening, Tessa tried to reinvent herself. I watched from a distance as she started a social media presence. Motivational posts about overcoming adversity. Inspirational quotes about rising from failure. Photos of her looking thoughtful and humble. It was all fake. All performance. She was trying to rebuild her image before the criminal trial. But when news outlets got hold of her fraud records and published them, everything collapsed. Sponsors who'd been considering working with her dropped her immediately. Speaking engagements were cancelled. Her carefully crafted image shattered. Within days, she'd deleted all her social media accounts, disappeared from public view completely. The empire she'd tried to steal had turned to dust in her hands. I didn't celebrate, didn't gloat, just watched it happen with a kind of quiet satisfaction. Not because I wanted her to suffer, but because justice had been served. Because people who hurt others for their own gain eventually face consequences. The universe has a way of balancing things out. Sometimes it just takes time. For months after I'd retaken the company, Colton showed up at the office gate one morning. I saw him through my window. He was just standing there on the sidewalk holding a coffee cup. The same kind I used to bring him when he was younger and working his first projects. He didn't try to come in. Didn't knock or call. Just stood there looking at the building. At the company that had been his. That could have been his legacy. If he'd just been patient. If he'd just trusted me. I watched him for about 10 minutes. Saw him take a sip of his coffee. Saw him wipe his eyes. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, I saw something in his face that wasn't pride or ambition or manipulation. I saw regret. Real genuine regret. He looked up at my office window. Our eyes met through the glass. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then I nodded. Just once. Nothing more. No smile. No wave. Just acknowledgement. He nodded back. Then he turned and walked away. I stood at the window long after he'd disappeared. My hands were shaking. My eyes were wet. But I didn't go after him. Because some bridges need to stay burned. Least for now. The next morning I walked into my office early. The sun was just coming up, spilling golden light across the polished desk. The same desk where my husband used to sit. The same one they'd forced me out of. The same one I'd fought to reclaim. I sat down in my chair and looked at the nameplate Thomas had made. It said Marilyn Reed CEO, in the same elegant letters as the old one. For a moment I just sat there feeling the weight of everything. The betrayal. The fight. The victory. Cost. Then I picked up a framed photo from the corner of my desk. It was of my husband and me on the day we'd signed the incorporation papers. We were young and hopeful and had no idea what was coming. I did it, I whispered to the photo. I saved what we built. I kept the promise. I set the photo back down and turned to my computer. Opened my email. Started responding to clients and employees. Getting back to work. 'Cause that's what you do. You survive. You fight. You rebuild. And you keep going. I whispered to myself, so quietly only I could hear. You can love your child and still choose yourself. And for the first time in months I felt completely free. Free from guilt. Free from doubt. Free from the need to prove anything to anyone. I'd done what needed to be done. And now I could finally breathe.